The goal should be to actually make a match based on the skills and gifts of ministers and the needs and passions of congregations. I wound up with a congregation, and when I met them, I'm like, oh, these are my people. And what they need, I'm pretty sure that I know how to give them. I wound up serving them for 15 years. But it was because we took the time to actually understand what made us match to them.
Saludos, this is Christina Rivera, and I'm a minister at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and this is our podcast. I wanted to thank you for joining us today. I hope this inspires you, hope it builds your faith, and hope it gives you perspective to experience the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message. Wepa! Bienvenidos, beloveds. Welcome to another episode of the Church of the Larger Fellowship's VUU, Voices of Unitarian Universalism. I'm Christina Rivera, she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you from my beautiful ancestral homeland of Borinquen, also known as Puerto Rico. Aisha Hauser, how are you doing? Where are you from? Where are you doing? What's going on?
I'm Aisha Hauser, she, her pronouns. And I'm in the land of the Coast Salish people, also known as Seattle, Washington. So that's where I am. Michael.
Greetings, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. I am the Reverend Dr. Michael Tino. I'm the third of our lead ministry team here at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and I am joining you from Peekskill, New York, the land of the Kitchewan and Wappinger nations, about 35 miles north of New York City. I am filling in for Lucretia Williams, our broadcast producer, today because she is at the Distillery Preaching Conference that is happening in Montclair, New Jersey, a Unitarian Universalist preaching conference being put on by Errol de los Santos, who is a seminarian and candidate for the ministry. And it's very exciting that that's happening, and we're very excited that Lucretia could be there.
I grew up not far from Montclair. That is only about 10 minutes from where I was raised. So I've been to that congregation several times. Anyway, feeling a bit nostalgic for New Jersey.
What's like the sanctuary look like? Is it pews or is it like chairs or stained glass?
What's funny? I won't be able to remember whether or not it's pews and chairs, but here's what I will tell you. I have a chalice necklace that's silver that I get remarked upon all the time. That chalice necklace is based on the metal. It's huge. It's behind the chancel. That came from the Montclair. That piece of jewelry came from the Montclair congregation. Michael, do you remember if it's pews or chairs?
It is pews. If you remember our intro video, Montclair is where Ali Bell was ordained. There's actually a scene of the inside of the sanctuary where I am putting a stole Ali, and that is the Montclair Unitarian Universalist Congregation Sanctuary.
Speaking of upcoming ordinations of CLF Learning Fellows, shout out to the soon-to-be Reverend Jakaran Olaoya. If I had my confetti nearby, I still am unpacking. I don't know where it is. Who was invited into preliminary fellowship by the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, and will be having her ordination early June-ish. So very exciting and well-deserved, and just so good for our faith. And
I have booked my tickets already to be there. So
nice. And a lot of announcements the last couple of weeks of ministerial placements, including, and now I'm going to say her name and forget where she's going, former President Susan Prentice Gray. I don't remember where.
It's going to Indiana, Bloomington. And former CLF Prison Ministry Learning Fellow Jennifer Johnson is the candidate in Concord, Massachusetts. So we're excited. Speaking of our former learning fellows. So
that's exciting.
It's really exciting to see where the learning fellow, we should have a former learning fellow view.
We absolutely
should. And just see what our former learning fellows are up to and doing, because, I mean, I know everybody thinks that their interns are like the bomb, but the CLF Learning Fellow cohort is pretty remarkable. When you see what so many of our previous learning fellows are up to in Unitarian Universalism, it's a cast of just really faithful, that phrase, good and true servant, is just definitely made for the the CLF Learning Fellows and what they go on to do. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
You can feel the tech love.
So last weekend, all of us woke up to learning that Iran retaliated and sent drones and missiles to Israel because Israel first bombed the consulate in Syria, the Iranian consulate, killing, I want to say, 16 people. Anyway, I've had a couple hours of this might be maybe the end. Like, these folks clearly, many are maniacal who are in power, have nuclear weapons. Putin has already said it's inevitable. So I'm kind of like, this is a moment for the spirituals, even if we don't believe in heaven or hell. And I'm just kind of pontificating here, like, existentially, this moment in time where it's like, and then I kind of didn't get as freaked out as I thought I would. I mean, I did for a minute because my kids are far from me and I would love to be a little closer to them. I did call each of them. I didn't call and say, hey, might be the end of the world. Love you. It's just a regular I love you call. Because why freak the young ones out more than they are?
My weekly message, which will soon go out. If you're listening to this, Ashley, yes, I approve the draft that you sent. If you're not, oh well. My weekly message that will soon go out from the CLF mentions the fact that our youth and young adults are crying out for us to pay attention. To pay attention to climate change, to pay attention to divestment, because they really want the world that we are leaving them. And they would really like us to do something about it now rather than passing it on to the next generation the way it was passed on to us. And I say this as whatever generation you are, I'm a Gen X, and I want to take responsibility for what our generation has done, as well as try and help heal what the previous generations have done.
We have reached a point of no return in many of these crises, right? We're at a point in climate change that if we don't do drastic things right now, there might be no stopping. Like, the ocean temperatures have set records every month for the last year and a half. Right? The last 18 months, record high ocean temperatures. Coral reefs are bleaching in massive numbers. And once the oceans start warming up, then the ice caps start melting, and there are things that get put into place. So there's a decision point right now. Those who are in power have to do something, or there is no turning back. And similarly with the Middle East, if nuclear war breaks out between Israel and Iran, I don't think those two nations by themselves have enough nuclear warheads to affect the end of the world. But if they pull in Russia and the United States into their proxy war, we're cooked. And global thermonuclear war, there's no coming back from that.
Yeah.
Right? So, of course, people are screaming at the top of their lungs, do something now.
Yep.
Anyone who wants to inhabit a world in 10 years or 20 years has to be screaming.
And it's not hyperbole. I've been living in Puerto Rico now for going on 4 years. And I was out in the water day before yesterday, and the water temperatures here vary. The water was so hot, not warm. It was hot that I seriously had a moment of thinking, is this going to burn me? Like, that is how hot it was in the Shallows area. And I've never had that like fleeting thought passing through my mind of like, wow, if I stood in this area of water for just a couple of minutes, like, what would happen?
And this is like the Caribbean Sea. This is not a pond or a lake that doesn't have an outlet.
This is moving water. This is not a captured water area. I was like, wow, we are in some serious deep shit. Let's be real. And Aisha, I 100% affirm your wanting to reach out to your kids and just say, hi, I love you.
Yeah. And the thing that I was thinking as you both were talking, for the time that we had lockdown, it didn't even take that long for like the earth to start wanting to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as we opened things up again, we stabbed the earth again and made it bad. It's like the earth wants to heal if we just would stop being shitty. Like, I understand why it's all happening, but it does feel like it's all coming to a head, and it's all so connected. All of it. Settler colonialism, climate change, violent extractive capitalism, and a system that's simply, okay, before I go into a word salad, we can do things differently. We just have to want to. None of this is inevitable. Yes, we're past a point of no return. However, we still have some chance at something of it not being terrible. And it's all about the stories we tell ourselves. And you know what our government, the US government, is fucking completely on board with now? Banning TikTok. I'm sorry. We need to breathe, and the waters are getting hotter, but please, TikTok is the problem.
Have we discussed this on The View yet, this TikTok thing? Because it's like, of course TikTok is the problem, because people are effectively organizing one another on it. Let's just be really clear.
Twitter was the problem, and then Facebook was the problem. The minute young people have a platform in which they can actually have the ability to affect change, then the powers that be are like, wait a second. Wait a second.
And especially the minute that they have a way to affect change in ways that old people don't understand. Yeah. I have a TikTok app on my phone, and I will watch TikToks. But let me tell you, the moment that I make a TikTok, that platform is past its.
I make TikToks. I mean, not that many, but I actually have done a couple of lives with Reverend Arik from Leicester, UK, and we've had Unitarians across the pond. And here's the thing I didn't know until a few months ago when the TikTok ban, at least I started paying attention to it. I think the number is 70 million people in the United States have small businesses through TikTok. Yep. So yes, it's absolutely an organizing tool. And there are people who've left their careers because whatever it is they offer have been able to thrive and make a living off of TikTok. And I guess the question I have is, do the folks in Congress, clearly who are not in touch with so much, not understand like 70 million people losing their livelihoods, the impact of that? I don't know. I'm like, who's giving them the briefs? I don't know. I feel like there's going to be unintended consequences.
To me, that makes it a threat to capitalism. If people are able to say, I don't need to work for minimum wage at your exploitative restaurant or whatever, and let you abuse me so I can pay my rent, because I can make enough money to pay my rent on TikTok.
Yeah, they need the workforce.
Wow, that's even more sinister than I thought.
So the people who are voting on it are on the side of the people who want cheap labor.
Mm-hmm. TikTok will not be sold to an American entity. Let me tell you, the Chinese company already said, y'all can go fuck yourselves. There's no world that we're selling TikTok to an American company, because what precedent would that set? So right. China is absolutely not to go. Just everyone needs to get that out of their head. They will not, and they shouldn't, because guess what? The United States is not the only country that uses TikTok. It is globally an incredibly popular app. I'm not going to say they don't need America, because they do, but they sure as shit not going to give in to the U.S. In what fucking world? It's not going to happen. China will not sell, or is it ByteDance? They will not sell to anyone in the United States. Yeah. So
they already tried that once during the pandemic when TikTok hit. They were like, oh, we're going to ban this. We're going to outlaw it. And people are like, no. We like to think we're the center of the universe here in the U.S., but really we're not.
Talon Heath Saunders. Yay! We revitalize your spiritual revolutionary optimism. We're doing here what we can, because joy is an act of resistance. And if we can find joy together in this community and where we can get it, please do, because holy shit.
Absolutely.
So speaking of joy, because I realize we haven't talked about this since you're back, Chris, there was some Unitarian Universalism happening on the Star Trek cruise. Speaking of just pure, unadulterated joy.
So some of you may or may not know that I'm a huge Star Trek nerd fan. I'm a sci-fi nerd fan, Star Trek being my first entry foray into sci-fi. And for the past 3 years, I've been honored and privileged to save up all my money to treat myself, my once-a-year thing, to go on a cruise that is dedicated to Star Trek. So what they do is there's this charter company that actually buys out an entire Royal Caribbean cruise ship and then sells tickets to this cruise. So it's like a Star Trek con, but it's on the cruise ship. And they change out the names of all the restaurants, and they make the elevators, the turbo lifts, and the television show. It's so much fun. But what I found the first year that I was there is that there's a lot of Unitarian Universalists on this cruise. I had put a chalice on my cabin door, and several people, because everybody goes around looking at each other's decorated doors, and several people were like, "You're you, hey." And I was like, "Oh my God, you're kidding." And so the second year I did a UU service, and while I chose the wrong time to do it, there were a lot of people that were very excited about it. And this year's cruise, even more so, I actually had dinner with some folks that are very interested in Unitarian Universalism, some people that are already UUs, and some people who would like to become UUs. And also made it possible for one of our UUs of color to be able to come on the cruise, because he is creating a new alternate Star Trek universe called Dark Trek, which is centered on a Star Trek universe that is centered by all people of color and primarily women. And if you want to check that out, the podcast is out there. Its third episode is out there.
Speaking of future view episodes that we're going to have to have.
Yes, we have to do that. But what I loved about the Star Trek cruise is that the values that are centered in Star Trek are so closely centered in Unitarian Universalist values. So the idea that there's this phrase, infinite diversity in infinite combinations, is one of the phrases used in Star Trek. And I think that like it was just a boat full of Unitarian Universalists who didn't know that they were Unitarian Universalists yet.
Well, and that's just like the Star Trek way of saying pluralism.
Exactly.
We have our word for it, and Star Trek has their word for it, but it means the same thing.
And so just being able to talk to people out loud, I know sometimes we, as Unitarian Universalists, think that evangelism is somehow a bad thing, which I really don't understand, because if you think that this thing is so great for you, why would you not want everyone to have it? That's kind of the thing that I don't get. But like, I'll be in the hot tub and I'll be talking to people about the ways in which Star Trek and Unitarian Universalism kind of dovetail, or I'll be in the buffet line, or I'll be anywhere. And people are so interested in, like, they did not even know that religion or faith had a place for them, which really tells me that there are so many more Unitarian Universalists out there that just don't know that they are. And, you know, we have a responsibility to reach out to them. So Talon says, I'm a Trekkie too, but I like Star Wars as well, the old extended universe. Amen. I went and saw my first Star Wars movie at the movie theater outside under the stars. And it was like the Death Star was coming at me. You know, it was so great. And Talon goes on and says, Star Trek is what made me consider an egalitarian worldview. It showed me interracial relationships and interspecies, even when I was growing up in a hyper-racist rural area and family. It showed me so much. Captain Catherine Janeway had her statue revealed in Bloomington, her fictitious birthplace, and it is so cool. Voyager and Deep Space Nine are my favorites. And yes to all of that. And this next cruise coming up this next year is the celebration of Voyager, because it's I don't know, 20th anniversary. It's some big number. So they're getting the entire crew of Voyager to come on the show. But one of the things I wanted to say also was one of the most recent iterations of Star Trek is Discovery. And the main character of Discovery is played by a woman named Shaniqua Martin Green. And the thing I love about her when she is talking about her journey in this role and in her journey in acting is she always mentions her faith, always. She always talks about how the presence of the holy is where she goes to when she has questions or when she's not sure, or how she centers her family, her husband, and her children. It's just so beautiful to see someone who is so grounded in who she is, partly because of her faith. So yeah, if you ever want to see somebody from the Star Trek universe talk about their faith, just look up on YouTube some of her talks, and I'm sure she'll bring it in because she does every time.
Well, you let me
I
know
love
when there's
that.
a Deep Space Nine cruise, because that's my favorite.
Deep Space Nine, I think it's still coming up.
I love, flip through the universe and encounter new people, but like stay in one place and encounter new people, and like have a planet with an actual religious system that you get to examine. I'm all into Bajoran religion.
Yes. Yeah. One of the first ways in which we really saw trans identity brought into the Star Trek universe in a very different way. Now in Voyager, we actually see that in what we call a Terran way, but the idea that a person can change and evolve throughout their life, and that is a wholly accepted and expected part of their existence.
What I love about Star Trek is, since it's the beginning, it takes on stories that speak to social commentary, as opposed to Star Wars, as someone said to me, is basically keeping up with the Skywalkers.
Well, Star Wars only does not take on social commentary if you don't realize that we are the Empire. Once you
Very good
realize that
point.
we are the Empire,
Very good point.
you want to see yourself as the resistance, but
Yeah.
at least Americans, we are the Empire.
Yeah.
Once that makes sense, and you're like, oh shit.
And every
then it's all
president we
full of
had has
social
been Darth
commentary.
Vader. Every single president we've had has been Darth fucking Vader.
Yep. Vanessa says, good day, beloveds. Love the concept of Star Trek. I've watched its development from the start. So glad to see it growing. Yes, it's amazing. It's the 3rd episode just launched. There's a featurette. And once we get the 5th episode launched, it'll be available in all of your podcast venues. You have to have 5 podcasts before you can get it onto podcast platforms. So we're very, very close to having our 5th podcast available, and then it'll be everywhere.
So I thought that was our moment of joy.
It is.
Also, speaking of moments of joy, you are just coming out of Finding Our Way Home, our religious retreat for Unitarian Universalist religious professionals of color, and I assume that was filled with moments of joy.
It was filled with a lot of joy, and I almost wrote about it for this week's newsletter, and I'm not ready to yet. Like, it was so remarkable and so just tender and beautiful and filled with the friction points that are always there, but also just, it was a very different Finding Our Way Home retreat. In that we tried to, as much as we can within the space of a week, we really tried to deeply engage with what it means to continue to be colonized in the United States, right? Because we are, and yet we don't see it that way. And I think coming to Puerto Rico, which is in fact still a colony, you can call it a territory, but it's a colony of the United States, it was easier for us to really examine what that feels like, because we were in a place that truly felt like home. Like, so many people were like, this place just feels like I'm home. Like, there's nothing, the absence of whiteness, and don't get me wrong, there's colorism here, but the absence of whiteness as the default was really felt. And I think that's the part that I'm still like, I need to write about it and think about it more. But yeah, it was a really, for me at least, it was really powerful Finding Our Way Home.
So what else is going on, folks?
Well, I was going to say we kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the show. So search season is in high. Yeah, we're getting all the notices, all of the notices are starting to pop in, both about congregational communities who are looking for a settled minister. And coming with that is also some of the announcements of congregations who will be bidding farewell to their settled ministers. And so I think it's always interesting to think about that balance, right? That very often one congregation being in celebration means another congregation is going to start a process of grief.
I want to just say there's like this weirdness about the whole system that, like, I don't know exactly how to say this. I'm trying to find the right words. Right. So if you ever hear the word failed search, and I put that in big scare quotes on purpose, that is such a horrible, horrible phrase.
Right?
Because what it means is we did not find the right match for us.
Yeah.
Right. And the goal of a search should not be to get a minister at any cost, to get whoever is willing to come for whatever you're willing to pay them. That should not be the goal. The goal should be to actually make a match based on the skills and gifts of ministers and the needs and passions of congregations. Right? That should be the goal. And if that match is not made, congregations and ministers both shouldn't settle. You shouldn't say, well, they're not really right for me, but I'll try it. And I understand there's pressure financially on those of us who require incomes to eat and live. And there are a lot of jobs out there that can be 1 and 2 year jobs. And I know that not everyone is super mobile, and that's a reality. Some people can move, some people can't. And I think we need to like re-examine what the goals are. The first time I went into search, I remember very clearly the first time a congregation said to me, "Thank you for applying. We're not interested." I just remember that very clearly. It was my first ministerial search, and it was the first time and I said to the person who called me to tell me that, they called, they didn't ghost me at least. I said, "Can you tell me a little bit more about why?" And it became really clear that I was not the right minister for them. 3 words into their sentence, almost. And I'm like, oh, well, thank you for not being interested in me. I didn't say that. Those were not the words that came. Like, thank you for not being interested in me, because we would not have been a match.
For them having the clarity to know that, right? The gift. It was a gift to them and a gift to you.
Absolutely. And so I had to reorient my brain as someone looking for a job and following my call into parish ministry. And I wound up with a congregation. Let me tell you, I don't know that I ever told the good people of Mount Kisco, New York this, and if you're watching this, I mean this as nothing but a compliment. They were the very last congregation that I clicked on in the search system, because you have to like click, yes, I'm interested. They were the very last one that I just wasn't sure. I'm from this area, so there was this, do I really want to go back to the place that I'm from? And that's what I had to figure out. Do I want to ask my husband, who is a journalist, to try and find a job in New York City? We had to discuss those things. Right? So they were the very last congregation that I clicked on. And when I met them, I'm like, oh, these are my people. And what they need, because they had needs, I'm pretty sure that I know how to give it. And we totally clicked in a way that didn't happen with other congregations. And I wound up serving them for 15 years. I was there 15 years. I loved them. And I loved them when I left, which is the best way to leave. Yeah. We weren't angry at one another. We weren't fighting over things. There wasn't petty nonsense that drove me away. I loved them when I left. But it was because we took the time to actually understand what made us match to one another. So I want to tell you all out there, ministers and congregations, it's worth it. It's worth it to actually do the work of figuring out if this is the right place for you, if these are the right people for you. And if you don't get someone in round 1, there's round 2, there's interims, there are consulting ministers, there are a lot of wonderful people who are willing to sign a 1-year contract.
How come they don't have it like, I've always been puzzled by, to be fair, I'm going to ask this, no, I haven't really investigated why, but like, okay, religious educators.
Mm-hmm.
We need a DRE, please apply. Why isn't it the same with ministers? It feels like this whole like shrouded in, or is the gatekeeping who can apply? Like congregations, I imagine, can just say, like the CLF did. Somebody mentioned the request for proposals process of the CLF, which is how 3 of us got called. But I'm curious why congregations don't just say, we're looking, here's how to apply. And this whole portal, not portal, I don't understand
There,
why not just have it be open.
there is some gatekeeping because you have to be in right relationship with our association, that is in ministerial fellowship and in good standing to go into search to actually click on a job for settled ministry. More and more congregations seeking contract ministers are saying that. And CLF broke the box. CLF threw out the box and built a new container with an open lid and said, "You tell us what kind of ministry you want to bring to us." And people did that.
Yeah, and it was interesting that we had the idea to apply as a team while they were writing an RFP that was going to invite individuals and teams. Without knowing that, we were waiting for the RFP to come out so we could see how we needed to tailor our application to an RFP that we had assumed would probably just invite a single lead minister to succeed Meg as a single lead minister. And out comes this RFP that actually invites individuals or teams to apply. So to me, it even more said the way we wanted to approach this was the way that CLF was looking for, to Michael's point of getting to know whether or not what kind of ministry you want to be approaching is what the congregation that you want to potentially partner with is looking for. So that was definitely, in my opinion, the universe working together.
It's an interesting process.
I would appreciate the process a lot more. I think also if there was a little bit of gatekeeping on the congregational side.
Yes.
Is a congregation ready for a settled minister? Have they done whatever work was necessary to support a settled minister? Have they had friction with previous ministry? Is it time for them to look at shared ministry? Like if there was a little bit more emphasis on not just if the ordained fellowshipped ministers were in right relationship, but also if the congregations were in right relationship.
I'm going to jump in here because I'm always the minority in this conversation 100% of the time. Yes, and so the thing about that, way back in the before times when Jean Pupke, may she rest in power and peace, Allison and Susan were running for president, one of the questions said to the three of them, and I don't know which venue because I went to many, was should there be a file on problematic congregations? And this is strictly my opinion. The only person who answered that correctly, or at least in my opinion, was Jean, because she said no. And the reason she said no is what exactly is my kind of unease with labeling problem congregations. Not that there aren't any, that's not my point, but to her point, and I agree, since we have a system that credentials and affirms professionals, leaders, we're faith leaders. And I guess I'm also bringing in, I'm a social worker by training. If we have a system that says here are people who are trained to lead any given congregation or chaplaincy or system, but we're talking now about congregations, where in our, I'll go from 1961, since the merger, where in our system have we had enough healthy leaders who haven't harmed congregations? And because a lot of these congregations that are super problematic have had a legacy of some kind of misconduct. Mm-hmm. So then that congregation spends the rest of its history protecting itself from a problematic minister. A minister gets hurt by a congregation, they spend the rest of their career. So where in our system have we made, and I said this to the institute when they gathered us for the book Widening the Circle, I said, so okay, so now we have people who are in essence lay people coming together in community. We don't have a creed. They're not coming together because they think Jesus is the light of the world. They're not wanting promises about what happens after death. It is, we're trying to be in community. So it already feels like a new experiment, new being less than 100 years. And so when we pathologize, and yes, it's not the congregation, I get it. It's where then in our system have we given those congregations leadership and modeling and moving through the challenges so they can learn to, I guess I feel like, I don't know I say this as a faith leader, that faith leaders as a whole in our denomination have done enough to, this isn't about blaming. It's more like it's a systemic thing. I just, here's what I think. I don't think labeling or saying to congregations, you are so badly behaved. It's more like, okay, there hasn't been an opportunity for this congregation to have healthy leadership in a way that models how to be in community. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm going to stop my word
So
salad.
the question needs to be, how do we get that congregation the healthy leadership that they need
Right.
in order to do the work they need to do and move forward?
Instead of saying they're a problem congregation, I'd rather that we say, how do we do this?
Oh
That
yeah,
might
yeah.
not be
I would
true.
not want any congregation to be labeled in the search processes, this is a problem congregation. I would want more transparency on, this is a congregation that has really been encouraged to take an interim or take a developmental minister and has decided not to take that advice and has gone into the search process anyways, which I think is not always the full transparency that we see.
So, for example, if a minister has a negotiated settlement or a rough ending to their ministry and it is known, they get put into a review process and they have to reflect on what happened in that time and do that with congregational life staff. They reflect on it. Sometimes they write an essay, whatever it is. What was their role in it? What was the congregation's role in it? And once they've done that reflection, then they're cleared to go into search. But until they've done that reflection, they're put on hold, right? And the congregation that they left can just go right back into search, right?
So needs that too.
The congregation needs the reflection time too.
I agree.
Right now, we've moved away from a system where even interim ministers have specialties in terms of what kinds of interim ministries they do. I mean, maybe there's a minister who specializes in coming in after conflict and helping people, or helping a congregation deal with conflict. Maybe, certainly there are ministers whose specialty would be dealing with congregations that have had ministerial misconduct in their past. We call them after pastor congregations. Yeah, Christy is right to say there's a Hope for Us team now who they do conflict work with, and they're a great team, but there's still not really a system in place to say, here's what you need. Hey, congregation, here's what you need now. And maybe it's not a settled minister with a limited term.
I mean, yes, to your point, Michael, I appreciate okay, where's the reflection time, the reflection opportunity for congregations? And I think having something like that is deeply pastoral rather than blaming is a place to start. I think that's an excellent idea because I don't think that's happening right now. Rob Spurko said some congregations are so distrustful of the UUA that it would be hard to get them to take that advice or accept a good leader because health looks like wokeness or whatever to them. Very good point, right? Yes, there's definitely, we're not in a vacuum. There is the impact of the wider political system on our congregations and our people. And I think at least having some kind of pastoral response to, this is a very challenging situation that hurt a lot of people, and you all are hurting too, because sometimes people who are aggressive in situations of congregations are feeling like they don't have a place to be. This is their community, right? Anyway, I agree with you. I like that idea of what would it look like for a congregation to be pastored to, and what does self-reflection look like for them as well?
Yeah, I mean,
so there can be lessons learned for a lot of.
It has to be relational.
It has to be relational.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
And right now, I think what Chris was trying to point out is we give congregations kind of a pass because we have this system of polity that we misunderstand.
Right.
Yeah.
We both misunderstand and intentionally misunderstand.
Yes.
So I'm on my congregational polity tour of congregations right now. I've updated it and I'm taking it on the road because, yeah, that's one of the tools that gets used most often, both misunderstood and sometimes intentionally misunderstood.
And Rob Spurko asks, is this a place where neighbor congregations can help? And yeah, that's exactly what's supposed to happen.
Exactly. That's what congregational polity is actually supposed to be.
That's exactly what's supposed to happen.
You're supposed to be in relationship with your neighboring congregations or congregations in the association and accountable to those congregations. It's not just that we get to decide that we want to do whatever it is that we want to do in a vacuum. Yes, it's that that newfangled Cambridge platform from, what is it, 1868?
1648.
1648. I'm dyslexic.
That's right.
And it is a thing. And God, if only we could actually 400 years later or so actually do that. Like somebody was like, we need a new Cambridge platform. I'm like, can we just do the one that we have? Because we're not even doing that one right yet. I'm just saying. So anyways, we are almost at time. Here is yet another episode of Voices of Unitarian Universalism, talking about all the things. One of the only places in UU that weekly takes a look at all of the issues, both within Unitarian Universalism and worldwide view through the lens of Unitarian Universalism. And we're so grateful to be able to do this and to do this with you all. I really appreciate everybody who's in the chat, our co-host, Aisha and Michael, for making this another great hour, because without all of you, we couldn't do it. So thank you all for being there.
See you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry. It's because of you that our ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit clfuu.org/podcast for more information. If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure to subscribe, to rate it, and to review it so that others can find us. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day.